Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Tales from Around the World. I'm so excited to see you today. I've been wanting to ask you, while you're in quarantine during this extraordinary time in our lives, what have you been doing to entertain yourself? Have you been reading? Have you been dancing? Have you been singing? Have you been going to online school? Have you been taking our online musical theater classes? I hope that you've been doing all of those things. One of the things that I've been doing, which is unusual for me, is baking. And I've been baking a lot because my next door neighbor is a nurse and she's spending so much time helping people get better, and she's there at the hospital with her friends helping people get better, that I've been wanting to make them some bread and some cake. And so I bought a rolling pin, and it looks like this. It's really nice. It's made of marble. And when I got it in the mail, I started thinking about who made this beautiful rolling pin from marble. And I started thinking about stories and objects and the things that we have that are really important to us. And the next story I'm going to tell you today is from Germany. But before we start the story, I want to tell you a few things about Germany. The first is that the German people are incredible cooks, incredible cooks. They make the most amazing pies and cakes and meals and all sorts of things, and that has been true since the beginning of time. They also make beautiful objects, and one of the beautiful objects that they make, of course, is castles. And while I've been in quarantine, I've also been reading one of my very favorite books, which is this giant book right here, and it's called Castles, and it's about castles all over the world. And I found a castle in it that I wanted to show you a picture of that inspired me to tell the story I'm going to tell you today. This is a castle right here. I'm going to turn around the book. This is a castle in Germany, right there. Okay? It's a castle in Germany that people have been living in, if you can believe it, for more than 500 years. This generation after generation after generation after generation of the same family has lived in that castle. And you probably noticed when you saw the picture that people are dressed in modern clothes because the picture was taken just a few years ago. There are castles all over the world. And one of the fortunate, amazing parts of our lives is that we can go and visit them. And so I hope you go and visit a castle someday if you haven't already. I got an incredible package in the mail today. It's from my friend Allery, who sent it to me. You can see it's in a little box, and I'm going to show you what's inside. Inside is a tiny, tiny, tiny little tree. You see that? It's a little tree covered with glitter. And then also a tiny storybook. And on the tiny, 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 tiny storybook, you can see is painted a tiny castle. We all have things that we love. This is one of the other things that I love. It was given to me as a gift. It's from Germany, and I think this looks just like a princess. The story that we're gonna hear today has a princess in it. And it has a tailor, and a tailor is a person who makes clothing. And I'm going to show you some paintings of the kind of clothing that people wore at the time our story took place. These are drawings and paintings of clothing that existed during the Renaissance. And these are costume designs created by my friend Samantha Fromm-Haddo, who's a great, great costume designer. And all of these designs became real costumes that people wore for a production. So as I'm telling you the story, I want you to imagine that the people in it were wearing velvet, and they were wearing silk, and they were wearing satin, and in some cases they were wearing leather, and they were wearing really, really worn out cloth because they went on great journeys. And that's what we're about to learn about today. The title of our story is The Glass Coffin. and it was discovered by the Grimm brothers, though it's been around for many, many hundreds of years. But the story that I'm going to tell, the version of the story I'm going to tell, was created by the author A.S. Byatt. Once upon a time, in Germany, there was a tailor. And the tailor was a wonderful, wonderful tailor. He made the most incredible clothing that's ever been. He was a very, very, very fine craftsman. But there came a time when people were leaving the villages and they were moving to the big cities, and the tailor didn't know what to do because he didn't have any more work left. And so he went on a journey through the mountains to find more people who needed clothing made for them. And as he journeyed, he started to run out of food, and he started to run out of water, and he had less and less and less money, and he started to get really scared. And on the 7th day of his journey, it was getting very dark, and he needed a place to spend the night, and he needed food, and he needed water, and he didn't know what to do. That was my cat responding to the story. So he was walking through the forest, and it was getting darker and darker and darker, when he saw in the distance a little cabin. And he could see that somebody lived in the cabin because the lights were lit from the inside, and he could see flickering yellow candlelight in the windows. And so very carefully, he knocked at the door to the cabin. This is my cat Blossom, and she absolutely loves stories, and so she's here joining us. So the tailor knocked at the door to the cabin, and a little old man answered the door. And the little old man said, "How can I help you?" And the tailor said, "Please, I've been traveling for days and days and days. This is my 7th day of travel, and I'm just hoping that perhaps I could spend the night in a warm place here for you, and I could make you a shirt if you have any fabric or anything that you need." And the little old man said, "I don't need any clothes. I have what I need. But we would not turn away a stranger who's hungry and thirsty, so come in, come in." So the tailor walked into the cabin, and there he saw a most amazing sight. There were no other people there, but there was a cat, and there was a rooster that was black and green, and there was a hen that was white, and there was a cow, and there was a goat, but the most extraordinary animal of all was a giant Irish wolfhound. And I don't know if you've ever seen an Irish wolfhound in real life, but they're enormous. My friend Kathy has an Irish wolfhound, and he's so big that he comes up almost to my shoulder. And at first, the tailor was frightened, and he took a step back, but the little old man said to him, no need to be frightened. But seeing as I've invited you into my home, could you please make us a supper for the night? If you go in there, you'll find the ingredients and everything you need to take care of us in exchange for your lodging." And the tailor took a deep breath, and he looked around. And first, he found some nice hay, and he gave it to the goat and to the cow. And then he realized the cow needed to be milked, so he milked the cow, and he gave a good saucer full of milk to the cat, who was very, very pleased. And he went into the storeroom and he found some nice corn. And he took the corn and he gave the corn to the hen and the rooster, and in no time at all, they were eating it happily. And then he went into the kitchen and he found some flour and some milk that he'd milked from the cow, and some meat and some onions, and he set about making the most amazing, delicious, fragrant meat pie. And while he was cooking the meat pie, he formed the top of it into a beautiful piece of artwork out of pastry. He formed flowers and curls and beautiful, beautiful little pictures out of the pastry dough, because he was, after all, a master craftsman. And when the pie was done and the scent of it was filling the entire cabin, he cut off a big piece and he gave a piece to the wolfhound. And then he and the little old man sat down together and they ate the delicious supper that the tailor had prepared. And the little old man said to him, "We're very grateful to you. We didn't expect you to do so much for us. But because you've taken care of everybody, we will offer you a reward. And you may choose the reward yourself out of 3 gifts that we can give you." And the animals drew very, very close. The big Irish wolfhound that was so tall and so gray with its sad eyes, and the cow and the goat came close, and the cat, who liked to jump just like my cat does, came and sat on the arm of the tailor's chair, and the hen came close to him, and the rooster came close to him. And out of a hidden cupboard, the little old man took 3 objects, and he said, "You may choose." And the first object was a leather bag, and the leather bag, as the tailor shook it, he could tell it was filled with coins. And that was his first option. And the second thing that the little old man gave him was a big iron pot. Beautiful, beautiful, polished iron pot. The third thing the little old man gave him was very curious. It wasn't like the other 2 at all. It was a key, but made of glass. The key was made of glass, and it was the most intricately melted, carved, beautiful object the tailor had ever seen. But when could you ever use a glass key? What glass key wouldn't just break in a door? And the tailor, because he was such a great craftsman himself, was very, very curious about who could possibly have created such a beautiful, beautiful object, and what could it possibly be for? And he sat there and he looked at the 3 objects. He had the coin purse, and he had the pot and the key, and he had heard of magical objects before. He knew that the coin purse may be a purse that gives money forever and ever and ever to the person who takes it. And the pot may be a dish that makes food forever for the person that takes it. But the key, he had no idea at all what the key might do or be, but he was so entranced by its beauty that he said, "I will take the key." And the little old man said to him, "You have chosen not with prudence or daring, but with adventure. Take a feather from the black and green rooster, and take a feather from the white hen. You will hold up the 2 feathers in the air, and you will hear the west wind starting to come towards you. Don't panic. Hold the feathers up, 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 and the west wind will lift you into the air, and she will take you far, far, far away from here to a field that's open and free of everything except one enormous rock in the middle. And when you see the rock, you'll put the rooster's feather down on it, and it will open, and you'll go to a passage underground. And at the end of the passage, you'll come to a curtain, and when you see the curtain, you will take the white feather from the hen and put it against the curtain, and then you will see what you will see. And the animals all drew a little bit closer, and the hen allowed him to take one white feather, and the rooster allowed him to take one black and green feather. And the little old man said, "Go now. Otto says that it's time." For Otto, you see, was the name of the very sad, very mournful, very big Irish wolfhound. So the tailor gathered all his possessions together, and he put them in his bag, and he put his bag over his shoulder, and he went outside. And now it was very, very dark at night, but he felt very brave, even though he was just a small tailor. He felt very brave because he had the two feathers, and because he had made so many new friends. And he took the two feathers out, and he held them up in the air, and from far, far away, he began to hear something that sounded like the wind. And as it came closer and closer, it was louder and louder and louder and louder. And he did exactly what they said. He held the feathers up, 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 up in the air, and he felt the wind come closer and closer and closer, and he was caught. And he flew through the air on the wind. And at first it was terrifying. And then, when he was less scared, he opened his eyes, and below him, he could see all of Germany. He could see the forests that looked like emeralds in the distance. And he could see the castles with their turrets. He could see the moats around the castles, and he could see very, 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 very far away the tiny diamond sparkle that was the swans swimming in the moats of the castles. And just as he was beginning to think, well, this isn't so bad after all, it got faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, and he landed on the ground. And he was still holding the feathers. It was daylight, and he was alone, just as the little old man had said, in a vast field. And below his feet was a stone. And you remember what he had to do then, right? Yeah, he had to take the black and green feather and bend down and lay it on the stone. And he stepped back, and the stone opened. And the tailor looked down, and deep, deep, deep below him was a very dark passageway, and he did not like the look of it at all. It was dark, and it was cold, and it was damp, and there were worms and roots, and the tailor didn't like to go underground, not at all, not at all, not at all. But he trusted his new friend, the little old man, and so slowly, slowly, he lowered himself into the ground. And he climbed down, and he came to a set of steps, and he went down, 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 and it got darker and darker and darker and darker and darker. And he thought, well, maybe if I take out that really beautiful glass key, it will reflect on some little light that's being let into this dark place. So he took off his bag and he took out the key, and to his astonishment, a beam of light came from the key, and suddenly he could see everywhere. And he walked, and the passageway got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And finally, he came to a curtain. And he knew that that was the curtain that the little old man had told him about. So you know what he did then, right? He took the white feather that the hen had given him, and he reached out very gently, and he put it against the curtain, and the curtain opened. But then there was an even smaller passageway, and the tailor thought, I can't fit through this passageway. I'll never, ever come out again. And so he turned behind him, holding the key as the light, and he realized that he didn't know the way out. He had to keep going forward because everything behind him looked the same. Dark passageway after dark passageway after dark passageway. So he had to choose. Was he going to try and get out? Or was he going to go through this tiny, tiny, tiny little narrow opening? Well, he decided to go forward and see what was in front of him. So he walked through, and there he saw three very, very strange things. The first was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of glass bottles. They were all different colors, a rainbow of glass bottles, and each of them seemed to have swirling smoke inside them. And the tailor stayed far away from them because he didn't know what was in those bottles. He had read Aladdin. He wasn't taking any chances. And the second thing he saw, inside a glass dome, like a snow globe that you might have at home, was a tiny, 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 tiny replica of a castle. And the castle had moat around it, and tiny frozen little swans in the moat, and a forest all around the castle, and beautiful turrets and stained glass windows, and it was the most beautiful thing the tailor had ever seen in his life, but he couldn't imagine what kind of craftsperson was so clever that they could build this tiny, tiny, tiny little replica of a castle and a moat and swans and turrets and a forest and get it into this little snow globe. And he put it down. And then he saw the third wonder, which was a coffin made of glass. And in the coffin, as he leaned down over it, he saw what looked like streams and streams and streams of golden silk moving softly. And he thought, what is this? What is this golden silk? And then as he leaned down further, in the golden silk, he saw a face sleeping. And he realized that it was a princess enclosed in the glass coffin, and what he was seeing all around her was her hair, which had grown so long, and she must have been confined there for a very, very, very long time. So he looked at how to free her, and he realized that, of course, what all adventurers find is their heart's desire. He held out the key, and the key fit exactly into an opening of the glass coffin. And when he turned it, the entire thing shattered to pieces. And the princess sat up and she said, "You must be my prince at last." And he said, "No, no," he said. For he was a shy man. He said, "I'm not your prince. I'm just a tailor who came here on a great adventure, and I happened to find you." And she said, "Well, we'll have to be very quick, or the dark magician will find us." And the tailor said, "Well, who's the dark magician?" And the princess said, Oh, you need to know who he is. You need to know what happened here." She said, 100 years ago, I was living in my castle with my twin brother Otto. You remember who Otto is. I was living in the castle with my twin brother Otto, and we had such a wonderful time of it. Every day we would go out into the forest and we'd play, and we'd come back and we'd start big fires at the hearth, and we'd toast marshmallows, and we had the most wonderful time. And then one day a man showed up at the castle, a stranger. And my brother liked him very much, for we had never left the castle, and the man had traveled all over the world, and he told my brother about all the incredible things that he had seen, and my brother was entranced by his incredible stories, and I was very jealous of my brother's friendship with this stranger. And then, in the dead of night, I heard this terrible music, and the stranger walked into my room, and he said, "You will marry me." And I said, "I will never marry you, not in a million years. I saw you for what you were immediately. You're no good." And the dark magician said, "You will marry me. Agree to it right now." And the princess said, "I will not. I can still talk, and I still have a voice, and I will not marry you, and you must leave the castle immediately. This is my home, not yours." And the dark magician said, "Oh, I'll bide my time. I'll bide my time. But I have put a spell on you that will make it impossible for you to ever tell your brother what I am. And that spell will be on you, and you will be sorry for not marrying me." So the next morning, the princess woke up, and she thought it had been all a dream. But she and the dark magician and her brother were eating breakfast together, and the princess kept trying to tell her brother what had happened, but every time she tried to tell him, her voice froze. Though she could still talk about the weather and about what they were going to do that day, she couldn't warn him at all. And that afternoon, her brother and the dark magician went for a walk together in the forest. And when they came back, the dark magician said to her, "Well, your brother has gone away. He never wants to see you again. You'll have to marry me." And the princess said, "No, no, no, that can't be true." And she heard the sound of feet running. And it was an Irish wolfhound. And she saw in the Irish wolfhound's eyes that he was her brother, and that the dark magician had transformed her brother into a wolfhound. And the magician said to her, "If you agree to marry me, I'll change him back." And the princess said, "I will not. I will never agree to marry you." And the magician raised his arms, and he brought them down, and all at once, the people of the castle turned to smoke, and the magician imprisoned them in bottles. And he raised his arms, and he brought them down a second time, and the castle shrank and 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 shrank until it was enclosed in a glass globe. And he said, "You have one more chance. Will you marry me or not?" And the princess said, "Absolutely not." And the dark magician raised his arms a third time, and he went, and then the princess remembered no more, for she was asleep and imprisoned in the glass coffin. And she said, "But he's coming. He's coming now. He's coming now. I hear his music. Save me. Save us." And his terrible music played. He came through the door. And the tailor did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed a shard of glass from the coffin, and he thought, maybe the magician will outsmart me. But the magician had eyes for nobody but the princess. And do you know what the tailor did? He came forward with the shard of glass and he stuck it through the magician's heart. And the magician turned to dust. And the castle came into being again. And people in the bottles came out of the bottles and were so excited to find where they were. And the great Irish wolfhound came back running towards the castle. But he was an Irish wolfhound no more. He was the princess's brother, And there they all lived happily for the rest of their days. And thank you so much for listening to the story of the Glass Coffin. I'll see you next time.